All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Saturday. Happy summer. First weekend of summer, I think. All right. Um, my name is Jan Salinas. I'm the programs manager here at Beyond Baroque. I want to welcome you to the Wanda Coleman Theater and to this afternoon's reading with Douglas Messerli and Stacey Levine. First, I want to acknowledge our presence on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Tongva peoples. We acknowledge the wrong done to indigenous communities through colonialism and genocidal practices. As an arts organization, we are committed to uplifting their stories, cultures, and communities. Beyond Broke, for those of you who may not know, is a nonprofit literary arts space that's been around since 1968. Its roots are deeply embedded here in the Venice community. Started out as an experimental magazine, evolved into a bookstore in Abbot Kinney, and it moved here into this space that was the original Venice City Hall building. But in the 70s, poets, writers, artists took it over, and it's been our home ever since. So now instead of, we have meetings sometimes, but you will mostly find performances here of poetry and a variety of performance art, as well as exhibitions and workshops in the space year-round. Just to give you an idea of what we have in the space going on in the next couple of months, we do have a workshop with one of our board members, most recently that joined the board a couple months ago, is Rivet Resto, a poet from Puerto Rico and currently based here in LA. We are opening a new exhibition curated by Jody. We do have a bit of a reception after the reading, so you're welcome to join us and know more about the artwork. It is a group art show of collage from mostly artists based in LA. And this coming Thursday, we're also featuring a lineup of alternative literature poets that's kind of growing in places like New York, but are also making waves here in LA. And one of longtime poets that have been in the space here is Jack Skelly. He will be reading with three other poets, Omar Bárcena, Lily Lady, and Brittany Menjivar. And we have that poetry reading over in the staircase, and kind of fits the whole occult and punk kind of poetry vibe that they bring to the space. But we're also hosting an Arabic poetry and translation program later in July, featuring Zeina Hashimbek, Sedan Khalef, and Maya Salame. And we can do all this thanks to your support. If you are a Beyond Baroque member, thank you so much for supporting the space, for also giving a platform to artists and writers locally and internationally. And after the reading, also feel free to grab a few books from both of our poets and writers. We have a good selection of titles outside, and Stacey Levine is promoting a new novel. She'll be reading from Mice 1961 today. But lastly, before I introduce the authors, just a round of applause for the team here at Beyond Baroque, from Quentin to Michelle, Eric, Stacey. Thank you all. And thank you as well for spending the afternoon with us. So readings, first we'll hear from Stacey Levine. And just so that you know a little bit about our author, she is the author of two previous novels, Mice 1961 being the third latest addition to that. But she is the author of the novel Straw and Francis Johnson, and two story collections, My Horse and Other Stories, and The Girl with Brown Fur. Her fiction has appeared in the Brooklyn Rail, Tin House, the Iowa Review, Yeti, the Santa Monica Review, and other magazines. For her fiction, she has received the Penn Award, a Genius Award from Seattle's News Weekly, A Stranger, and numerous prize nominations, grants, and fellowships. She lives and teaches in Seattle. Please give a warm welcome to Stacey Levine.
Hi, thanks for coming out. It's really nice to be here with you. Some of my friends and others know I've been working to communicate in writing about rodents, and not only that, but some rabbits. I think you can see this. This is My Bunny and Me by Lindsay Barrett George and me. While everyone was sleeping, I drew a rabbit. His fur, roan and burr gray. The inquisitive ears rotating. Someone with whom it would be worth communicating. The soft mechanics of fur. The guide hairs, which are longer. The down under fur, highly insulating. Light cuneiform markings on the belly. The sobering warmth of Bunny. If I could touch him, I would know almost without a doubt that he was real, for I would grow instantly itchy. Bunny, if you were real, I would gaze at our image, a two-bodied Cerberus in a puddle of glass. Bunny would offer solace and solidity, I believed, even more than my family tree. Bunny's words came suddenly. We are all rivers heading into an ocean. Oh, Bunny, I would reply, which ocean do you mean? Smiling down on him from the oak branches, for we would play in the yard this way comfortably. Bunny waited, nose dimpling. All names for words describing God in all languages contain the ah sound, the open vowel, he said. For example, God. In all languages? Bunny, that just can't be true, I said. Allah, Yahweh, Ankh, he said. Ankh isn't a god, I said. That does not matter, said Bunny. Adonai, Brahma, Baba, Krishna, Zeus. What about Zeus? I said. It has no ah sound. Al-Malik, Bunny pressed on. The presence of the sound in these words is no accident. It is a healing elemental sound, you see. Amen. The grass writhed under the breeze. I wondered if there was something in Bunny's reasoning, and I thought it through. Whoops. Bunny, I just don't agree, I said. In the face of truth, there is no room for small argument, he answered. Forget your thoughts. Forget your mind and body. Shut up, Bunny, I said. Besides, I already know the dark secret of rabbits. Before, I was too polite to mention it. Here were Bunny's eyes, purplish, anomic, glaring. You eat your own poop, I said. All bunnies do. Why do you do that? Stop that practice. Don't eat that. Eat leaves, eat grass. Here was the cream fur parting, recreasing. Bunny in the silence of his being. If he were real, he would have found a carrot behind the shed to chew it in private with adorable relish. He would have exploded into a run, tearing through the neighborhood yards, sharpening his turns. I would have searched for him in the town, asking the mailman passing, "Have you seen a very smart yet doctrinaire rabbit escaping?" "No," the mailman would remark. "Hey, bro, why are your hands so red?" I would glance at my hands. "They always look that way," I would answer, shrugging. There's a touch of lyricism in fur and endings. If Bunny were real, his teeth would have chattered just slightly when he was content and happy. Real or unreal, Bunny sat roundly in the drawing I was holding. From the points of his nails, a long light scratch on my skin, the line between everything that is the case and our own imaginings, the line which at all times is evaporating. And I wanted to say too that after I read and after Douglas reads, we would be happy to chat and talk about questions or hear anything you have to, any remarks or questions you have to say. And so I'll read a little bit from my novel, Mice, 1961. Original title, though, was Where is Mice? ? And then the publisher decided it should be the title, Mice, 1961. Alarmingly late, far past bedtime, Jody's nightgowned arm finally struck the bedroom's light switch plate, blotting out the day. As the milk they'd drunken released its heavy clay properties in the sisters, they drifted to their beds. Feeling their ache for sleep in my own, glimpsing their side-by-side beds, I stood outside their door, mostly for the sharp pleasure of being excluded. An unquestioned metal spar protruded from the middle of the sisters' bedroom floor, such a small stake, yet someone tripped over it every day. Jody's sleep was heavy, Mice's breathing shallow and fast. The sight of Jody's beautifully weighted parallelogram of brown hair on the pillow often lulled me toward my own sleep. All creatures, even the smallest, produce nectar, stories, during sleep. I wanted the sisters' dreams to be burnished and lovely, but their dreams, in which they often searched fruitlessly for candy is Jody's and Mice's mother, were difficult, I knew. Often in the mornings, they sat in the kitchen trying to recall their disturbed dreams as I listened from my place behind the couch, feeling as ever that I could not do enough. Neither drinks nor pills, drops nor steams have the power to suppress or restrain dreams as with trees' arms espalier against walls. No, it takes so much more than that. Maybe a lifetime, if you have it to spare, can evaporate terrible dreams. My dreams are usually pallid. Jody sprang up like a coil. "Girdle, I didn't mean to scare you, Jody. I didn't notice that I'd walked into the room." "Do you often spy on other people in their beds?" she demanded in the dark. "Not really." "Liar, go back to your place," she said. "But may I ask you something, Jody? I've wanted to all day." "What is it? Hurry up," she grated. "This morning, you see, Jody, I took a shower. It's about time. And you see the cream rinse dripped down my shoulder and back and dried there so gluey and uncomfortable. Well, wipe it off, stupid." I saw the sour whites of her eyes in the dark. "But I wonder if, can't you see I'm trying to sleep? Go get some tweezers and hot cotton. Wipe it away. Get rid of it. I'm telling you, that's what you do." "You mean you'll let me open the cotton box?" I cried happily, bounding to the bathroom, for occasionally my heart soared from Jody's attention and care. "Just be quick." But in minutes I dawdled at her bedside again. "Gosh, Jody, do you suppose all kinds of substances like cream rinse can settle into a girl's skin over time and disintegrate her?" "Quiet," Jody struck the bed. Without fail, intricacies and small undertowing notions repelled her. Look, Girdle, you've been with us for more than a month or two. Isn't it time you moved on? A clawing movement inside me. Oh, Jody, mayn't I stay longer? I'll wash the chair's legs, I promise. That will save you money. This idea must have pleased her, for she blinked as if considering it, and in moments she was asleep, shoulders softly atop the blue pillow. Lying behind the lint-colored couch at night during those months, I began to worry about this story's helper, who inevitably would arrive. The thought of him made me miserable. In these types of stories, this requisite helper arrives by way of some long-standing and rote dictum, and usually with no personality. The figure is a non-specific blank whose role it is to steer the central girl away from her quandaries and into a better future. The helper may be affixed to the story's walls from the start. They may have known the central girl for years, or they may arrive later, latching onto the girl as a friend or lover. I sense that the story's helper would be a man, and an oafish, enormous deadweight who'd tug and lug the story away from its center. I pictured him oily in manner, always about to sidle onto the warm ledge of my imaginings where I perched with the sisters, who, heads bowed, hair hanging in hanks, lingered with me out of time. The helper would commandeer the story, I was certain, and jettison me from it. While appearing to ease the girl's problems, he would in fact fix her into the trap of the story's ending. I felt it. The helper wasn't the worst part, though. The story itself, with its claws, would grub at the central girl, I believed, and I was right. It would indoctrinate her and tamp her down when her pursuits were not on point. The story, possessing the upper hand, would keep her miserably sanitized. Would I have any chance to outmaneuver the helper and the story itself? Running that day, each girl split the mild wind. After mice switched direction and dashed beneath the thick, life-green palms lining Reef Way toward the bank wall, Jody, across the street, ran half a block west, then stopped to check her tiny wristwatch. She whispered a few phrases to herself. I could not hear them all, perhaps seeking the well-known scant consolation that words can sometimes bring. It was close to 5, the brightest hour of the day, as Jody sometimes observed. It wouldn't have occurred to her that I was watching. She won't run away, no, Jody said to herself. She wouldn't. She's probably hiding near the canal or playing with those stupid radios. It was not the younger sister's slightly out-of-fashion Peter Pan blouse collar that afternoon that caught the high schooler's attention, and it wasn't her overbite. My own teeth, large as chalk blocks and chipped too, drove my ongoing admiration of the girl's tidy, peg-sharp teeth. Jody's teeth I never noticed. It was nothing likely specific, but instead everything that drew the cruel teens to mice. After her mother's death and the move to the new neighborhood, she had begun the inveterate, unfeminine practice of racing around the boulevard, even wandering much farther than that. And if the teens homed in on her, mice had the ability at times to elude them. It was the girl's own fault that she had no friends. I heard neighbors say and repeat that to each other from the very first quiet evening I spent in the neighborhood. As if those words extended a form of permission into the atmosphere, the teens began chasing the girl that very week. It didn't matter if arrays of adult neighbors watched on those early evenings from Pincus Park's wading pool or Parrott's grocery, the teens still went straight for mice. Maybe in the girl's bobbing electrostatic moon of hair, her near complete absence of color, and her oddly quick movements, neighbors saw, then grew transfixed by what it was to be the lowest of the low. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stacey. All right. Okay, so next up we have Douglas Messerli. Douglas is the author of 9 books of poetry, most recently Stay, published in 2018. He's a writer, editor, publisher, and professor. In 1976, he founded Sun and Moon Press, which was devoted to publishing experimental poetry, fiction, and drama, until it closed in 2004, and Messerli opened Green Integer, which we have a very special selection of titles in the bookstore that you're welcome to check out. Messerli graduated with a BA and MA and PhD in English from the University of Maryland. And he has taught at Temple University, Occidental College, California Arts Institute, Otis College of Art and Design, and the California Institute of Technology. And today he'll be reading from a very lifelong, special collection of work that, it's taken him over 2 decades, probably more. So please give him a warm welcome. Yes.
I no longer stand for long periods of time. I've read here. And I thought it might be just useful, very briefly, to sort of explain what I mean by that term so that you understand what I'm talking about, so that it doesn't seem like the poetry is just out there someplace. So I'm going to briefly read a very short introduction. I have bemoaned the fact that I ever took up the profession of publishing, something which I now realize, which I was probably been destined, and which I am terribly proud of, well, but which also somewhat obfuscated the central reality of my life, that I am primarily a writer of poetry, fiction, and drama, not just a reader and conveyor of books. Perhaps that is why, although most significant poets have begun their lives early on by publishing in small literary journals and other things, but then at some point quickly abandon it to stress their own poetry or to focus on their own work. According to my Wikipedia entry, which he just mentioned on the internet, I am the author of 9 full books of poetry, along with several smaller chapbooks, 2 collections of plays, and 1 work of fiction, some of these even under pseudonyms. I also have written a lot of short tales, yet whenever anyone talks to me, it is inevitably about publishing or my rather overwhelming, even to me, I have to admit, collections of criticism and commentary, which have amounted into thousands. In the millennium of 2000, I determined to do something about that. In the poems from In Between, I attempted to explore an interchange between my many poet friends and myself, the way I had dealt with them through my publishing, but wished to also have them understand as a way to relate to me as a fellow poet. Accordingly, using the well-known John Cage stratagem of working through another poet's work, he mostly did it anagramically, I wrote longer prose poems about dozens of my friends and sent the results to them, suggesting that they respond in a similar manner by writing through my work, either working in a single poem or the entire body of my poetry, or through whatever other methods they might wish to explore. Most of the poets responded, but few of them turned out with discernible success. Even the most lyrical among them, such as Barbara Guest, sent back oddly unpoetic, often seemingly ineffectual responses. Some became quite literal, using full lines and passages of my own work. Some used the occasion for erasure, wiping away certain of the original passages to them to write a new work. Others wrote entirely new pieces that had nothing to do with an interaction between us, as if between were an effort for a kind of tit for tat, or your poem for my poem kind of relationship. Many of these were truly interesting, but very few, with the exceptions of a handful of remarkable poets and comments by writers such as Robert Creeley, Fanny Howe, Robert Kelly, Rosemary Waldrop, Nicole Bouchard, and Nick Piombino, the last who is a Freudian psychologist who knows very well how to turn language into a different kind of interpretation, so to speak, fully comprehended the interchange I was asking for. And in the end, I felt that to publish such a work would amount to an anthology of misunderstood poetic responses that might have been interesting as a textbook of poetic modes and interpretation, but a failure as a shared work of art. Even though the book, which was first published by which was going to be published by another imprint, and it was in final galleys, I refused to move forward. That was 2000. And I was left with a great deal of good intentions, but a feeling of a failed concept. Meanwhile, a number of my aged poet friends quite sadly died, and other poets I loved and had published similarly over the years passed away, I writing through their works as a memoriam. Also, in the meantime, I had written through the works of several other poets and even a few prose writers, living and dead. After a decade of having the failed volume in front of me, I reread the poems and realized that the formalized prose poem formats which I had chosen to write these works was all wrong. And when I began to break down into lines, I found new formal relationships to the original poets that I had been resisting in my original prose forms. By removing most of the responses and just referring to the others through a footnote, I began to see the possibilities of the work and realize what the poem had been. Most of the poets had presumed that writing through meant a literal word-by-word exploration of my original text, as if it held some secret meaning or evaluations of them. In fact, the poems I'd created, although often sounding quite narrative, were not at all about their actual beings, their behavior, or even attitudes towards life. And certainly, these were not at all about our personal relationships, except through a highly associative interchange of language. And pulling out small bits and pieces, by pulling out just small bits and pieces, a snippet of text, a joining of 2 or 3 words, or even on occasion a full line, I had allowed myself to enter a sort of poetic dream world, the one from which I always write, which permitted me to subconsciously to enter my friends' worlds while still writing my own poems. Their words simply brought up associations, memories, imaginary fictions, wished-for conversations, possible interchanges, and discussions which their ordinary lives had not permitted. I don't believe in the supernatural. I don't even really truly believe in surreality. Yet in these works, it is almost as if, very briefly, I took on the role as seer, calling up imaginary relationships between the two of us. Perhaps that is what I had always been doing as a close reader. When I wrote, even as graduate students, I felt like I was getting almost into the mind of the writers I was writing about. Perhaps that's what all critics ultimately feel. All I know is that when I wrote about people like Eudora Welty, Juna Barnes, and Isaac B. Singer, all of whom are much older than I and now dead, who I knew, when I spoke to them in real life, it was as if to a stranger. It was a close mystical experience, I now realize, that made the sharing between so very absurd when I offered others to do it. Most of my far more rational friends couldn't comprehend what I meant. So in any event, I began to redo writing through and exploring what I had been doing and trying to understand why it wasn't that I wasn't relating. And so I'm going to read, I have a rather large stack, but I'm only going to read a few of these. I'm not going to read them all, I promise you. And I can hardly see any of you, But if you begin to be bored or tired, please raise your hand, let me know. Or if I'm getting bored or tired, I'll just stop in that point. But I'm going to read, because I haven't read for so long, I'm going to read a series of these until I sort of feel that I've made my point, so to speak. The first one is Harp on Mountain of Glass for Barbara Guest. Ambushed oars leave the drift of boat what will. It is autumn of ripples, the cycle of a flux. You cannot tell me that it resembles glass that enters the cat's mouth. In winter, the shriveled stalk, the shriveled stalk the breath until it freezes the sunset in a situation of splendor against. Then spring rolls to straw. The grown pear tree connected to the vision of the cowslips bend. That is when the oars out of the figurative sky come roaring back to what the slipper intended. I will row the fable out to the rustler's end. I take the tide that delays the simple water's exposure of its May. The blank sky offers what's limpid to the unwashed sail, ere the evening's arch. The resembling grows, a gaze goes, for Diane Ward, who is a local poet not living here at this moment. I stand waiting for the focus of almost same-size view of a house, unpermitted to settle in the foundation upon which it was built. It hovers somewhere between the torn-up image of the instructions and the ensuing silence of the actions played out there, mid-air, as if it were an alien power had commanded it to rise to the occasion of what has become routine, an elevation of language to reach the top of stair. Every floor submits to destination, every wall delivering the gesture of depart. The imperative being offered its process, a call for a body's seeming interest in emotion, a flow of the inverse proportion of your interest in me and mine and in what my mind gropes for, an emptiness of what was possessed. The door is alternately closed or half, filled in the dark approaches. Leave your hat upon the matted hair. Go away. That will not leave what is left beyond without a floor. If all these people must, if necessarily they have to have directions to our haste, let them center us in grim origin. Let them help us to begin what we never started. Let them long for a short-lived then. Now for Dennis Phillips, who used to be the head of Beyond Baroque many, many years ago. Now, as a verb speaking in the singular, offers a dream of a conditional person. Only sleep cures it, but the tourist has learned that he can fix the figure in a snapshot if he frames against the building's tilt. The only defining is done in absentia, as if a civilization had slept in for an entire life. The city wall has crumbled from the pressure of the millions of palms put to by the pilgrim's pleasure in witnessing its stand. The frozen lawns a particular stress. Now, the windows have to be shuttered. Now, the reasons against. There's a time each day when the birds collide into the flies of their rest. Light shifts the delusion into the trauma, a fact into a figure of speech. The distance has had to be cut away like a great coat. The storm on the opposite shore is approaching the square town, driving the denizens themselves once more. Now, the snapshot no longer exists. The definition of the night against light defines what without a witness in such a place never was, never could have been. The idea of a figure is not the same. there for Robert Creeley. It is hard going into a so small a cut. I grow tensions, pain flowers. Across my face a true tops my head. A head, any, is what has now grown large, larger even than the isolation of the shadowed patch of grass. Now everything is everything. I keep breathing in the skin of dilemma, how to stumble without the wall. Ah, brother spirit, take this physical sentence into consideration when you curse my flying off. 2. Who is human again after such a long time? The bird of my desire is a desire to wing what should have been so carefully taught. The small spaces of existence do confine the edge of the porch to neighbors, dogs, persons of the house. Debris litters entrance. We gain what is not wanted and lose one another after another. Here, the body screams for its return. The leftover light of the emptiness is all the container the mind has capped. I shouldn't have gone back to what I lacked, but there is where I sit and cry. Here, come near. When I wrote this, actually, Creeley wrote me back a poem in between that eventually was included in his collected complete works. And it's very short, so I'll read it. Well, if ever, then when never. House is round, sounds sound. Here's where, comes there. If you do, they will too. And I don't know how many of you know the poetry of Bruce Andrews. He's one of the few poets who I usually would never try to write through, like Gertrude Stein, because their voices are so distinctive that you can hardly write through them because they're their own voice, and you'll hear their voice throughout the whole thing. You can't really create your own poem. But I did try one for Bruce Andrews, and it sounds just like a Bruce Andrews poem. It's called The Out-of-Print Miracles. Is spacious, sort of like a sympathetic setting on the hands of consideration, a snap to a way pivot. I want to build up my muscles so I can shatter the ego of every misfit I meet. Human hands speak italic in adversity as parrots muff their phonemes. But I want to rouse the slogans, mop up the libido, and get out the graveyard quick. Is spacious? You think libido is content? Luckily, I have never needed to be a leader, but it was what I create a distance to response, is if a mannequin were to become maniacal. I would sing imposition, encircle the flip to flitter away, the swaying supplication. I would exaggerate insanity to sustain the neck of disgrace. I would propel applause clear across the boom. All right, let's talk about linearity, about the line you've been handing me. Make my brown eyes blue with a morpheme and male vulnerability, and I'd still permission the jab of the petulant spurt. I mean, who's to say whose presence raps the rattler? I am a preposter, which is, after all, why you love me, working my little dentures to the nerve of it. It may be after, but it still illuminates, and I practically need to separate my cookies. I dislocate your insult to acetate participation. I'll take your ineptitude to new eyes in the inevitable leaving. Accurate side by side, I'll accommodate our catchwords to pitch body language to the pits. We'll turn truth upside down as phenomenology pulls up to praxis, petrifying those the fray has left behind to be frightened. Is spacious? I don't know. But I'd like to Blaise Pascal, or at least Nick Piombino. Hermeneutics has never been a feigning coquette. I wrote a poem for John Ashbery, And I'll give his response first. He didn't write a poem back to me, but he wrote a very nice letter, a fairly long letter, and he says, the decibels, which is the name of this poem, the decibels seem to me to be a poem that I haven't yet written and would like to write, rather than a poem in imitation of my style, whatever that is. I still hope to write this poem. And here's the poem that I wrote that he still hopes to write, although he's no longer with us, of course. Surface bends to the restless shifting of new arrivals. Our equators glow with the human heat. No one has imagined the storm to be like this. Has it the sky? The gesture always hides the truth, suspecting, perhaps, what had been assigned to it or drawn from it into the dark, shadow where it sits. Every utterance is half met, half absent, half full as a mass. You woke up this morning pissing yourself over the gulf. And the voyage? I'm convinced there are some things of importance in the tunnel. You placed all the pleasures. You hyped the embarrassment back, and even if I'm not imagining it, laughed. Another example is how different each of us is. All those people, all those faces, all those hands, as the majestic ship pulled away, we wondered, why had everyone gone as suddenly? With all that coming and going, how can chivalry be sustained? There is nothing left but coffee and whiskey and cigarette butts. We set out on the sun porch on a solitary light. Keeping warm now is our primary occupation, lightening the arch. Does the foot jump? It's quiet, too quiet to scream. And Robert Calley, who's a poet, I don't know what to say, I never quite fully associated with, but when I wrote this poem, something seemed to happen, and I wrote, again, I'm using lots of poems, sometimes whole books, entire books. This is for Robert Calley. It's called Such Is What It Is. The sharpness allows for measure. Like a tiny cardamom seed, I slipped out of a pale husk. The alignment of grope is a body of train, a result of hours of conjectures, at which linger should the tunnel be put, and the snout sensed out. What whirls us? Outside the skin is what is left of hands. Outside the flesh, the turn, the back, is bad enough. Take the hammer, for instance, and go down the road, hit stone. A simple thing now is a fragment of your act. Take the flicker to the garden, the agonies to reasonable love. Take consent to mean desire. The sharpness allows for standing in the shower, half blind, like ink run out of a pen. At which refusal shall the decorum be set, and who shall sew the red beard to nape? Outside the species is a tail. Outside the tail, a dog is attached. Take woods to find the absence of light. Open your eyes. Take a knife. And he wrote me into this a very, very interesting response that I was truly almost overwhelmed. I was amazed and moved by the chrestomathy of your work you turned into a beautiful poem of yours. How much we get reading through one another's work is one of the great learnings of our time. And here, privately, personally, I am touched by how well you understand the doctrina of whatever it is from which my work comes. So I was really moved by that in some ways. I'm just going to read a few more. This is it's called Tottering to the Edge for Rosemary Waldrop, one of my favorite poets. If a pain pretends to be impenetrable, rewarding the neighborhood with too much light, then the difference between identity and the knowledge of oneself is read as a sticky August night, predicating an immediate disappearance of the sexual cry. I am tired of men measuring themselves by the distance between their bellies and their necks. As if an eye on the camera, they intended to play with words upon their parts. Can I laugh without meaning? Can I grab that thick desire I often feel with the whole edifice, never quite visible to the vanishing point of assumptions? All roads lead to a sentence, but I refuse to accept it. Rome is not a way to behave. To imagine hell, we need only close our eyes, its opposite being something we can never comprehend. Anxiety is a password to my childhood's anticipation for the horrors ahead. Even if my mother sits down in order not to weave, she might have fallen there upon the bed. Age is an immersion into the possibilities of all mysteries. From the window, I draw a vanishing point, even where the image is a stone's throw from reality. If I sit long enough, the dark hollows out an invention of the myth. Providence is a word for pretending to where your stomach has just dropped a moment or two before. The shadow that stretches across your face is probably a product of a cataract, a whole downpour of possibility you see only in the translucent rays of bright night. You fall into the suspension of probability and try to stand up to the gap between expression and what you might have imagined as sight. So I turned away from what I thought I might have to navigate, viewing from that panel a reflection of the vertiginous stairway where dancers descended. They were not dancers, I realized, but flashes of nostalgia, claiming my future existence. I put my hand up to shade my eyes, and then I saw it, the ink drying before I could write it out. Lines to silence out for Fanny Howe. Past the stone walls of language's love is a vineyard of my laugh, a way being bound that rhymes with the limbs mounting the air of the rising raft, or rift where my lover lays. Amor is a loaf of a round, and the genitals of language can create only those who read themselves. You there, in the end, gain time by marking the question off. A prison alights in a single sentence, and no one saw but the ghosts get up get up with me when the wolf howls. The significant grows in size with each heartbeat. We look across the path of our pasts, no window, no sleep. I'm going to be sick today, and I have to eat my boast. Long night of emergency come today. A center can march away, but this murky midnight air is like entering Boston backwards in a boat, a lesson to learn how to snore. You there, in the end, survived by burping babies. I have no one to blame, myself. Guilt, relieving guilt, is a get of killers, and memory, I'm pretty certain, has the same sentiment as want. Put up the racks and lay my body down. It tickles me to take my breath away. And Fanny wrote, which was very interesting, past the stone walls of languages, love is the vineyard on my laugh, a way of being bound that rhymes with the limbs mounting to the rising raft of the rift where my lover lies. Amor is a loaf of a round. Fanny wrote, I hooked up the lines and I waited. I hung up the sheets on a line and waited. Rain spattered the white linen. At last, recognition. I could see the writing, which I thought was very, very nice. I have so many good ones, but I can't read them all. I'll skip several. Inger Christensen was a great, great Danish writer who I really adored all my life, and her major work was called Day, which means it, virtually it, and it was in lowercase. March streams exist, if streams exist. From a train, tired soldiers or sheep who run from the herd. It's all erased, burned up in the throne of nothingness, like a substance instead of an act. Poof! A little incense that lingers across the air. There's that scent of dried apricots. The parrot speaks. The house is still open. The house, somewhere where I was suddenly born in that house, that wide open house, that narrow house, that house with all its windows closed, close as flesh to any family who hate that they have to stay so close. Never apricots, broccoli or cauliflower, even fried fish, and the flash of fathers and mothers and brothers. I recall the train slowly gathering speed as it took its way out of the station into wherever it went. Everyone was exhausted. Everyone went to sleep. And the train went on like a river that never stops. It was March or May or even June, since I have no memory of it. Everything is erased. Then we stopped, or seemed to, or went on again, and on like a stream on its march to the sea. This later, many days, I played with my tin men in the dream of the trip. Where have I been? Perhaps the child in the forest will show his face. He must at this point look a little like a tarnished star, a silver thimble upon his thumb, his mother's gift. Nowadays, dreams go around so openly. The soldiers are tired. Who could blame them? I put them back in the box. I got out my gun. I shot a ewe about to cross the tracks. I was so innocent. I was awarded apricots, but I never saw the soldiers again, and I never saw where I went and where I had been. Well, I have to read one for Pablo Copper, who's sitting right in the front row, who is a wonderful poet, but doesn't write enough poetry. But this is one gathered from his book of poetry. It's called Camping 1979 for Pablo Copper. One day on your porch, hidden in the attitude of staircase, times the dance away from following, I got lost in the spin of garden leaves, a little vortex into a dream about those hips in those cutoffs. The tree had come to live with the impact of the bed into which I felled it. We walked by the dark yard of our neighbor's whispers. One day, hidden in the attitude of the yawning, I took off forever into moving through just one day at a time. I lost what I used to cozy up to, dark prickly chin of chainsaw, that cut out to the past to get into. I have now forgotten how to switch it off, and I'm left with a tree about to stand on our hands as we wander all of those dark shadows. Who smoked the eggs you asked about? Surely you didn't suspect me of doing anything in the run. Nowadays I walk down the cutoffs you showed me to get anywhere fast, and I doubt any longer I could whip up the necessaries to egg you on to wonder. That tree stood up again, shadowing our path against the friendly window's gawk. From your height, you probably don't even notice that I'm limping, that I've been forced to give up the lobsters and rum. I have now taken all the detours of the map of the goose bumps, stroked off so very slowly in the moon I'd forgotten to wax. I used to eat mussels with the coal of my spoon, but now I walk silent to the arbor of your emerald outback. Do people sympathize with someone trying to remember to forget? I keep a piece of string around my ring finger just to tell me every day to tremble just a bit for independence. But lobsters do not really make very good dogs, and drinking nowadays makes me dizzy. I pine for a Rome I've never met. The couple on what's left of the cottage like to wag their tongues. And speaking of lips, some days I still see you sway in the sun, you hid away in that little box in which you've kept my regrets. The log is now dry enough to sit upon and listen to the song of longing. I'm sorry now I never saw you slip along the surf, but the record shows I've never been able to go the full distance. I just jump into the whirl of the little fishbowl's gossip. In another life, I will surely trudge through the sunlight and let out a gulp of pleasure at the sight of the fortitude has left in your open, those gaps between the jeans we inherited and the pants of our desires of pure possibility. Here I'm at the top of that plant that the sapling begat, ready to fall into a cone into the comfort of another seedling. And there I wait as long as forever takes to grow whatever. I'll just read a couple more short ones. This one is an odd one. It's for Vachel Lindsay, not somebody I particularly am fond of, but it's called I've Seen Lincoln Sitting in His Chair. You all know he wrote poems about Abraham Lincoln. The bitterness of shawl-wrapped shoulders, shadowing the yards of well-worn stones, cannot sleep in his linger. He goes by quaint as the dawn stars to the dark scour of the wept black night. No hero anymore in the sick cry of sober folk. Breathe deep so that he might sleep. If he is among us, he pauses by a door so slowly that it feels like folly to imagine the blur being worry, hope, or even care. Who can pace the up from down anymore? He lingers, his finger pointing back to the top hat that someone of another century might have worn to court the beauty they call justice. Lank, spare, burned away like the bronze tattoo of memory, he is nowhere, no longer pacing back or forth across the square prairie sewn into the quilt. Bow down and be dead, ghost. The warlords won the battle long before it had begun. Your loss of sleep in vain. And I'm just going to close with these two last poems. One is for Therese Bachand, and I've written a couple poems for Therese. This was called The Theory of Fatigue. It's a very short poem. A disappointed sleepwalker flirts shamelessly with variation, balancing on the caress of the tomb. The night strikes at midnight, and the bicycle falls into equilibrium as the innocent acrobat takes to her tresses. Come back to the kingdom of balance, Rapunzel recommends. But love isn't like that, nor is climbing one of Romeo's greatest achievements. There is a blistering logic to even a slice of bread, and corn and cattle make sense to the coffee. Yet, as always, wine precedes the narrative to which the wound is inevitable, or the wound, depend on how you want to say that. Memories are always unfair. Her hair was not at all as golden as the tassel foretold. Jealousy is only an itch for the silent performer to scratch at the very moment when he should have stood up straight. Perhaps the letdown was really a favor for the gay cavalier. And just to know that this is an ongoing procedure, and I probably will be writing, as my husband Howard says, this will not be the end of poetry, writing through. It will be a continuation. I'll probably die at the computer writing one last poem, one last essay, one last something. I wrote this just this morning, so I thought I could share it with you. It's called Roots, and it's after George Oppen. Roots which are themselves simply hoops to small self-interest we describe as leaking to the ancient air in, which I suppose we didn't really even want given the contagion of those dirty streets. Now we can do only the most horrific of killings in order to control the black winds, the squalls, the rags of forces that discarded us, and the world changed. Once upon a time there was a fish in the sea, iron standing in the midst of the mud, nothing whatever to hold on to since the mud and the iron were filled with fire and earth. We who did the killing claimed no responsibility. The roots had not yet grown into our bellies. The winds of March, the ides of iodine upon which we had pasted the pustil of our past. Therefore, young men determined to be young men, a beer bottle closing the door of continuance. The town was to be negotiated. The arms I thought to have embraced were only cannons. I remember the collar of the winter coat, the tree to where it took me and the toss, the roots and the end of my entrance into where they lay me down to sleep. All the boys accept them as currency. The boy who was destined to be lost. There is now a snow-capped volcano a few miles from here that spit up his name, the familiar flesh of a familiar disc. He was my brother, my mother, my smother of so much possibility. I called out to him and called out to him again. I called out to him, to his neck, his cheek, even to the lips into which a few moments only turned me into an adult. Of all the young men became fodder, dust for the cannon fire. Earth and iron grown to the mortar of what we as a generation built upon that muddy plot. We were not rooted, they reported, in the activity for which they had put us on the planet. We were not even the roots of our own desire. We were not responsible for the winds, the rage, the black plague which is stretched at our throats. The bellies are empty. We were not. Thank you. And as Stacey said, if you have any questions of either one of us, we're glad to chat.
Numbering
Yeah.
like with 5 poems.
It was precisely your age, yes. They're actually very formal poems, and that's something I discovered when I broke them apart from being prose poems. I really discovered I was a formalist without knowing it. And the one I just read you, for instance, is all in lines of 6. They're stanzas, so they're sort of almost like a triple sonnet or something like that. It's an odd kind of piece. But a lot of my poems, and a lot that I didn't read, are very formal. And also some of them are devoted to people, like I wrote one for Marjorie Perloff on her 80th birthday, so they're 80 lines. And I wrote a big long poem for Ko-Un on his 90th in many parts, but each one had a relationship with his age at the time that I was writing the poems. So yes, thank you for mentioning that. They turned out to be quite formal in a strange way that you wouldn't know if you just heard them.
Really enjoyed the first time. For me, it really pronounced the distance between reality sort of distance at the construction of part of the notice, and how you tether the two together based on different poets that are examining. Some poets have a much closer, longer. What was that experience like for you? Learn from that. my question. How do you decide, third question, decide the work, all very beautiful, flesh and bone?
That's a good question. I don't really examine my poems when I'm writing them in the way that I can say, oh, I need to stop now, or I need to move on, or I need to open this up or something, because I really work so intensely with these bits and pieces of language and my own associations to them. But you're absolutely right. It depends on who I'm working with, what poet, whether I can be really free and open and sort of be a language poet, or whether I have to be more narrative. And some of these poems are far more narrative than my previous poetry was very pun oriented. And through writing through other people's work, I began to, there's still plenty of puns in here all the time, but I began to focus away from punning and moving more back to what is probably natural for me, a kind of lyric narrative, but a lyric narrative unlike what we usually describe as lyrical narrative poetry. It's still a very intense, linguistic, playful way of dealing with language, and that's what I wanted to do: play with their language as well as my own response to it simultaneously. And so I don't really think I can question it while I'm writing it. I can question it afterwards as a reader, but not when I'm writing it. It's done. It's sort of finished, and that's what it has to be. I could write about it later on and tell you where I think I didn't succeed or where I did. But when I'm writing the poem, it's sort of what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was. Yeah, no, how you could. No.
Stacey, what I was struck by this time, although your work has always had a slightly theoretical edge, and it certainly has always had an odd narrative that goes directions that you don't expect narrative stories to go. They, people interrupt, they say strange things, they get into conversations, you don't imagine them. But this time, you actually talk about writing a little bit more than you have in your previous work. You actually talk about the art of writing and what that means. And that seems to me to be really wonderful in this new book that you're writing.
doesn't know. Taking that barrier really.
And she's caring for these children too. They don't know it.
They're teenagers.
Yeah.
But yeah.
The teenagers, she's caring for them. But it's also interesting, in the passage you read, she's very angry almost that it's going to be the inevitable story that some man will come in and then it's be an agent and then they'll have to get together and there'll have to be some aspect of that story. Well, this was fun. Thank you, folks, for coming out. Yeah. If you have more questions, we'll be out in the.
So much. Hey, that second lady, I missed the first reading, but she was talking at the end, right? Does she have a book here?